You're listening to Superflexology, a Superflex-focused fantasy football podcast with your hosts John Bauer and Mitch Sorensen.
We are finally back with more Dynasty content on another episode of the Superflexology Fantasy Football Show, a proud member of the Full-Time Fantasy Network. I'm your host, John Bauer. You can find me on Twitter at The Bauer Club. And we are back at it, like I said, with the Dynasty content. And as always, I am joined by Mitch Sorensen, and that's at DynoMC on Twitter. What's going on, Mitch?
What's up, dude? I'm really excited for this one.
It's been a while since we've got into the groove with Dynasty. And a little shameless plug here, looking at our three co-owned Dynasty teams. So we're here 12 weeks into the season. I'm not ashamed to say that we're 32-4 up to this point.
And the best part about that is we'd even sell out to do it. We either have our first or other people's 2020 first in those leagues as well.
Yeah, when you look at it, especially some of the leagues I'm in, and you know this, and you always kind of rip on me for moving future picks. We didn't do it in our co-owned leagues. 3 different co-owned leagues. We're 32-4. Not only that, but we are the highest scorer in all 3 leagues, a first-round bye in all 3 leagues. And like you said, I think the kicker out of all of it, we still have future draft capital.
Yeah, the best thing about co-owned leagues is it stops the stupid trades from happening. There's always the trades, you'll look back, you're like, what was I thinking? But when you have that other person to bounce it off of, that's like, no, we're not going to do that. It helps out a ton.
And it still happens every once in a while. Maybe you'll override me in certain situations or vice versa, just to, and you have to cave a little bit. But I think it's been going very well. And again, if you haven't had the chance to take on a co-owned team in a Dynasty League, I strongly advise you doing so. At least try it. It might not be for everybody. So I had a ton of different directions that I was looking to take tonight's show. And Mitch, and you always have to keep me in line because I'll send you show notes and you'll look at it and it could be a 3-hour long show. So I looked to cut it down a little bit. Some of the things that I wanted to mention tonight, we're actually going to do full shows in the near future. So what did we say? Probably around Christmas time, we're going to pick up with the Dynasty shows on a weekly basis again?
Yeah, it should be right around then.
The topics that we're looking to cover: players with plummeting ADP that are going to be values in 2020 startups. So bounce back players, essentially. Underdrafted Dynasty assets that at the conclusion of 2020 are going to seem like tremendous values. So kind of the 1-year look ahead. Startup strategies and settings. Changing landscape across the NFL with this fantastic incoming rookie class. And that's going to be a good one because, Mitch, you messaged me the other day and said, especially in Superflex leagues, this class is starting to look a little bit different.
Yeah, I think everyone had really high hopes for this quarterback class. And right now, I think it's 2 quarterbacks deep, and Tua just had that injury. So it might only be 1 quarterback deep as far as, we really care in Superflex leagues.
Right. And of course, when we talk about the changing landscape, we're going to spend a lot of time on quarterbacks. And that's something we're really going to dive into then. And another topic that we're really going to hit on, probably, I would say January-ish, maybe February, but it's the contracts episode and upcoming free agents and people to look at with changing situations. And this is something that we did coming into the 2019 show. And I actually listened back to it earlier today. So this is 5-6 months ago at this point. And I like the format, and it's something that I want to do moving forward. So that's something that we're going to hit on coming up here in the off season once 2020 hits. But tonight, I don't know if you can tell, Mitch, but I'm super jacked to be talking about Dynasty content once again. So tonight we're focusing on the Dynasty assets that we are thankful for. Have to get our Thanksgiving plug in there. I don't mean this in regards to aging veterans. Mitch, you and I, we talk about a Mark Ingram, Julian Edelman. So those are guys that really helped people do well during the regular season here and make their push to playoffs. But we're talking about appreciating assets and taking a deep dive into what we're doing with them moving forward from the standpoint of a team we currently have and from a new startup perspective. Mitch, we've talked about this constantly. Startup season is right around the corner.
Yeah, we were doing one, was it week 14 of last year?
It was whenever the fantasy playoffs were still going on, yes. And we did it on MFL, my fantasy league, and we still had to do it under the 2018 league settings, I believe, because the cutoff, it didn't hit yet. But yeah, startup season's right around the corner. And it honestly, I love fantasy playoffs. I love constructing your roster as the season progresses and approaches. But startup season, man, I am super excited for it. The way we formatted this show, we could have easily just gone through players where they had the biggest rise in ADP and look at guys like, Lamar Jackson, Darren Waller. But we wanted to focus on guys that we kind of talked about throughout the offseason leading up to 2019, guys that we invested in. And we always say it, but we don't just try to give advice. We actually practice what we preach. We're doing what we're trying to advise others to do. And this is kind of like a recap to that. And again, what we're going to do with these guys in existing leagues and what we're going to do in startups. So Mitch, start us off here. Who's one guy that you have a high ownership percentage that has seen a significant rise in their average draft position? What we're looking at is we're comparing the May ADP in startups, so May 2019, to the November mock draft ADP. And kind of looking at who the biggest risers are up through that point. So Mitch, who do you have?
So we might as well start off with a quarterback, and mine's going to be Kyler Murray. He was ADP 39, which was about the 4th round back in May. And now he is ADP of 21, which is mid-second. And I think it's going to go even higher with the 3 or 4 more games he gets to play this year. But he's done everything we could have hoped for at this point. And he's kind of made it so we don't have to worry about his health anymore either, because he started every game. I don't think he's even missed a practice yet. And he's averaging almost 40 rushing yards a game. He's not getting hit hard, and he's giving you the floor that you need at the quarterback position. He's not having interception issues that we usually see from the rookie quarterbacks. He's only had 5 of the year. And that's with that horrible offensive line, and they just don't have a running game. When you have to trade for Kenyon Drake week 8 or week 9, whatever it was, to try to help you out, it's horrible news. But if the Cardinals can go out and upgrade their offensive line, I think Murray will be a top 5 quarterback going, in the late 2020 draft. So if you're doing a startup in July or August, I definitely think Murray's going to be right around that 1st round, 2nd round turn.
Especially if they focus on that offensive line, kind of like you mentioned, whether it's free agency or the NFL draft. Let me ask you a question. Let me bring something up, rather. Do you remember what you said in the offseason leading up to the 2019 season about Kyler Murray in the first 3 or 4 games?
I do. I told everybody it was going to be the time to draft him after the first 4 weeks because they were playing some really tough defenses.
Yeah, and I don't know if his value really took that much of a hit, but you were spot on there because since then, he has been absolutely fantastic. And I'm actually really glad that you wanted to bring up Kyler Murray because it's something that I want to talk about kind of more in terms of a process when you're doing your startups or you're looking to trade for players. And this is an issue that I have, and I talked about it throughout the whole offseason, and it involves players like Kyler Murray, a player that you're going to bring up a little bit later, but we didn't know what to expect with this situation, right? They had a new coach, Cliff Kingsbury, coming in, a brand new system, moving pieces, a lot of new wide receivers, a lot of things were changing with this team. And typically, I avoid situations like that in Dynasty, especially deeper leagues. So we're talking about 14 or 16 team Superflex leagues. If you invested in Kyler Murray and you had to invest, you said what, 3rd or 4th round?
Yeah, it was about 4th round back in May.
Yeah. So if you're taking him that early and you're investing that heavily in these changing situations and it doesn't pan out, you're behind the 8 ball. But I guess you have to find the right balance between taking these risks and looking for more stable pieces. But Mitch, for Kyler Murray, you hit the nail on the head with this one. I mean, we talked throughout the whole offseason, and I was very hesitant. And I wasn't exactly on board with him going to Arizona. 1, because I thought it was a bad situation. But 2, like I said, we just didn't know what to expect from this offense.
Yeah, I think on our very first show or second show, I actually talked about how much I didn't like Kyler Murray going into the draft. I was really worried, with his height and everything. But the second he went to Arizona and he matched up with Kingsbury, I instantly knew I wanted him on a whole bunch of teams because Kingsbury was going to fit the scheme around Kyler Murray more so than what someone like Taylor's doing with the Bengals right now. He brought his scheme in and he's trying to make everybody fit to it. And it obviously is working out, horribly right now.
Right. You always hear people say fitting a square peg into a round hole or vice versa. But yeah, that's a great point with Cliff Kingsbury. He's making it work with the pieces he has, and he's adjusting around that. And we kind of scoffed at the idea whenever we heard how many plays they were going to run during the offseason. Everybody said, oh, no, there's no way. That offense is explosive and they are fast paced. And I think we expect it to continue throughout the rest of 2019 and into the future. So looking at quarterback range in May, So he was going right around quarterback 8, and right ahead of him, it was Russell Wilson, Aaron Rodgers, Carson Wentz, and then Kyler Murray fell right between Jared Goff, Cam Newton, Matt Ryan, Jameis Winston. Would you take Kyler Murray ahead of those 3 quarterbacks that were going ahead of him at the time? So Russ, Rodgers, Wentz?
The only one that I'd be hesitant on is Wilson, because I think, Russ is still really, really good. And I could see myself taking Russ over Murray, but there isn't anybody else there that I would even consider.
I'm on board there. I wouldn't think twice about it, though. I absolutely would take Russell Wilson. One, I think he's just a little bit of a safer option. He has such a strong track record. And not to say that Kyler Murray can't excel in the future and years to come, but I just like what we've seen from Russell Wilson, and he's just been absolutely incredible. I mean, you people are throwing MVP around in discussions with Russell Wilson, but Aaron Rodgers, I think he's a depreciating asset, and I know some people would argue with that. Carson Wentz, he's been horrendous. Jared Goff, whatever is worse than horrendous, that's what he's been. Cam Newton injury. Matt Ryan, I still love Matt Ryan, but I would take Kyler Murray ahead of him in startups going forward. And then Jameis Winston, just so much unknown with what's going on there. So we look at the quarterback range that Kyler Murray's going in November mocks. You're not taking him above Lamar Jackson, right?
No, I don't think he could do it at this point.
And then we talked about Russell Wilson. He's going right before Murray. It really did shift kind of just what we talked about there. Behind Murray right now in mocks, it's Rodgers, Wentz, Dak, and Ryan. I would move Dak ahead of Wentz and Rodgers. And I think you might be in a similar situation there.
Yeah, I think he's right next to Murray and Wilson. I mean, whoever you like more between Wilson, Murray, and Dak, I don't blame you either way.
Right. So, okay, what are you doing in existing leagues with Kyler Murray? So you have him. Are you looking to move him? Are you okay holding him based on the fact that you think his value is going to increase?
I'm okay holding him because I'm not sure if it's going to increase, but I also don't think it's going to drop either, just because he's always going to give you that floor and upside, and they run enough plays in that offense to they're not a good team this year, and he's still, top 7 or 8 in almost every category?
Yeah, I know he's up
He's
there.
8th in points per game. Even with that horrible offense, I think he's going to be fine, so I want to keep him on my team if I have him.
Now, here's one thing I want to mention. And I think it's really important to know this and keep this in mind. So we're running through this mock ADP, and we're talking about May average draft position as well. So Kyler Murray, he's going quarterback 5. That's not going to mean that every person in your league is going to value him as such. So when we look at ADP, it only takes one person every draft to be really high on a player, and it's going to jack up their ADP. So it might really not match up with consensus rankings or the general population's thoughts. One thing that I've noticed with Kyler Murray, and I only have one share, and it's in our one co-owned league, Mitch, but people are not currently willing to pay that price.
Yeah, I don't think anyone's paying that price, but I also don't think anyone's willing to sell him for any less than that price as well. So it's one of those, buy, sell things to where it's just not going to match up.
And this time of year, I don't know if I've ever seen a situation as bad as it is right now where the buy and sell windows on players are absolutely ridiculously far apart. But just keep that in mind when we're talking about ADP, that doesn't necessarily mean it lines up with consensus or the general population. So I'm not willing to move him right now. Are you willing to pay that price, quarterback 5?
Not normally. I'm normally not one to go and buy one of the higher priced quarterbacks because quarterback scoring so flat. I'd love him if he's on my team, but I'm also not willing to go out and buy Lamar for the same reason. Lamar is the quarterback 1 right now, but I'm okay having the quarterback 7 going into each week.
All right, let's say it's a startup and you're on the clock and Mahomes, Watson, Jackson, Russ, they've all been selected.
The problem is...
And let's say, because we always talk about trading back, let's say you can't trade back either.
Right. So the problem is if those guys are off already, it means they went pretty high in the draft. And that means some running backs and wide receivers are going to be dropping. So I'm more than likely just going to grab the best wide receiver running back that dropped instead of going for Murray at that point.
Okay. But in an ideal world, we are moving back there. Yeah, so looking at Kyler Murray, you're not willing to pay the price of quarterback 5 value. If you have him, you're probably holding him. And again, I think this is a really good example where during the offseason, you were proactive and you took that risk as opposed to being reactive. So a reactive owner, they're going out and they're paying that quarterback 5 value and they're paying full price, where during the offseason, you were able to get him at a slight discount, which I think is really important. And there are huge benefits and pitfalls at times to being proactive. But you and I think we both kind of take that mindset. And that's something that we've been in league chats and several discussions. I would categorize us both as more proactive than reactive. And I think you agree.
Yeah, I think it's the most important thing if you're going to play Dynasty is you need to be ahead of everybody on these moves. You're going to miss. I missed on a whole bunch of players this year. But if you hit on more than you missed, you're going to win and at least put yourself in position to win a lot of leagues.
All right, so I'm looking at the clock here, Mitch, and we're already at 18 minutes, and we've gone through one player as of now. Let's kind of do a little more of a rapid fire. And that's my fault because you can never get me to shut up. Up next, I want to bring up Josh Allen, and I have all his stats listed out here from 2018 to 2019. He has improved in pretty much every category, whether it's completion percentage, his passing yardage, rushing yardage. Obviously, that's taken a hit, but he's actually right there in terms of he's exceeded total touchdowns through 11 starts compared to 2018. You look at adjusted completion percentage from 2018 to 2019, that's up 10%. And the big thing with Josh Allen, the thing that I love about him, they are winning. They're 8-3. And I've had somebody tell me in negotiations recently that they have Josh Allen in the same tier as Jameis Winston and Mitchell Trubisky. And Mitch, I think you know what my reaction to that would have been like.
Yeah, I think that just comes from, the Twitter hive mind that we all have is Josh Allen sucked when he came out of the draft, and so he continues to suck now. And it's one of the worst things, I made a little tweet on about, I think you had some Josh Allen stat or something going on. I said one of the saddest things is I can't make fun of Josh Allen anymore because he's a good quarterback.
Yeah, and he's improved in every category. And I think part of it is he's a little bit more patient and conservative, and he's choosing his spots a little bit more wisely. He had 11 air yards per attempt in 2018, and in 2019, that's down to 8.9. And we've talked about the added weapons, John Brown, Cole Beasley, and while they weren't huge household names, they've really helped him in his development here in 2019. So we look at the May ADP, and he was going after Dak, Lamar, and Sam Darnold, but he was going right ahead of Trubisky, Ben, and Drew Brees. And if you look at the current November ADP, there has been a tremendous rise in value. So again, back in May or during the offseason, we're talking about these startups, and I shoved Josh Allen down people's throat at nauseum, and we're here in November. He's now valued as quarterback 11 in mocks. And again, I know, like I said, the ADP is not always going to line up with consensus or the general population, but he's now going ahead of Goff, Garoppolo, Stafford, right behind Mayfield, Ryan, and Dak. So we're talking about these guys, and we really do hope that throughout the offseason when we talked about them, you were able to get them at these discounted prices because it's going to help you tremendously. Whether or not you really believe in him as a player, he's an appreciating asset, and that's something that's going to help you in Dynasty. And like we talked about, be proactive rather than reactive. We've talked about Josh Allen so much, I don't really have to go into much more detail.
I have one more question about Josh Allen for you.
Yeah, I'm here to answer it.
So do you put him in the tier right behind like Dak, Wilson, and Kyler? Is he just one of the next guys up for you right there?
Yeah. Yeah, so he's going quarterback 11, but you and I, we talk a lot about tiers, and man, you've been getting on me. Full disclosure, I still have not updated my tier list, and Mitch keeps yelling at me, but I will get that updated. But yeah, I have him. If I'm in a startup at this point, I would take Kyler Murray, and I would take him over Josh Allen. I'm probably going to take Dak just because. So I do believe that Josh Allen, his job is secure at least through his rookie contract. So a few more years, but I think Dak has a better chance of being a real long-term starter in the NFL. And if that says anything, it's just that we're not people that go out there and have take lock. And Mitch, you and I have talked about that a lot. People get stuck on their ideas and their values and their overall strategies and beliefs on players, and they don't want to move beyond that for one reason or another. But yeah, Josh Allen, to make it very short and sweet, I would put him right below that tier. So what would that maybe be? Quarterback 8 to 10 range, somewhere around there?
Yeah, right around there. Just above Mayfield.
I wouldn't knock Mayfield too much. I know that you've criticized him all season, but the value is still there. And especially with the slight improvement. Well, no, we've seen a big improvement here over the last few weeks. I think his value is a little bit insulated, just like you mentioned with Kyler Murray. Mayfield's value, it might not rise, but it's not going to drop. So yeah, I would wedge him in between the tier that you mentioned and right ahead of somebody like Baker Mayfield. So those are two quarterbacks we wanted to hit on. And you have a wide receiver here that I absolutely love as well, but I'm going to let you take the lead.
I do, and it's Jamison Crowder. He's really came on the last about 6 weeks, but back in May, he had an ADP of 193, and now it's only up to 161. But I think that's a little probably from some early October drafts. I think if it was right now, he'd be at least in the top 10 rounds. But he already has 77 targets on the year, and he's kind of doing everything that we hoped that he was going to do in 2018. And I believe you said on the last podcast that you even wrote an article about him on before the 2018 season.
I did. It looks like I was one season too early on that. I can just scratch off the date and put 2019.
Yeah, all we needed was Darnold to come in. One thing we've known since Darnold on his rookie year is he loves slot wide receivers. There's just some Case Keenum's the exact same way. Darnold's a lot better than Keenum, but they both love throwing to the slot. Crowder, since Darnold's come back from having his mono, Crowder is 13th in points per game. He has over a 22% target share on the season. And the biggest reason why Crowder's ADP is going to continue to climb is because we don't know if Robbie Anderson's going to be back in 2020. Demaryius Thomas is already going to be 33. And I think it's just going to solidify Crowder as Darnold's number one going into next season. And I think Sam Darnold is really good and could end up being the best rookie quarterback out of that class.
I know a lot of people touted him heading into the 2019 season, or rather the 2018 season, and they share that sentiment. You know, they think that he skill-wise could be the best quarterback out of that class. So looking at the wide receiver range in November ADP, would you take Jamison Crowder ahead of Preston Williams?
Yeah.
Andy Isabella?
Yes.
Okay, so those two guys are actually going ahead of him. And MVS, Darius Slayton, Dante Pettis, and Anthony Miller, I know I'm taking Crowder ahead of all four of those guys.
Yeah, I think Crowder's going to end up being in the range probably right below Jarvis Landry. I would say, he ends up being between wide receiver 25 through wide receiver 30, if I had to guess.
So I think that's a little overzealous. I was going to say, so heading into the 2018 season, because last year was supposed to be his big breakout year, I think he was going right around back end wide receiver 3 range in startups. And I could see him falling back in line there, especially because we know that recency bias, it really plays an important role in the Dynasty community. And people, they are too biased when it comes to things that just happened. If he has a strong end of the season here, no doubt in my mind, I see him more in like the 32 to 36 range, but I think we're kind of in the same wavelength there.
Yeah, probably. I got a little overzealous there, but he's definitely going to be in the 30s. I think without a doubt, he'll be in the 30s.
So I think this goes without saying, but I'm still going to ask just to make sure. Right now, he's going wide receiver 59. You're absolutely paying that price in startups, correct?
Yeah, if I could get that in a trade during a startup or anything, I'm all over it.
And now for an existing league, let's say, hell, I don't even care if I'm a contender or rebuilding team. I'm going out and trying to buy Jamison Crowder. And I know we always say, okay, this player is a seller, this player is a buy. It really does depend on your league. And if I'm able to get him, I actually just bought him for 2020 second, and I'm competing. So I expect that to be later. And I was perfectly fine paying that price.
Yeah, that's a great deal for him, I think.
And then if I'm rebuilding, most likely my 2020 second is going to be early. That might be the threshold there, kind of like a mid 2020 second. And I'm more inclined to buy him if I'm a contender. In one league, I sold Vance McDonald for him straight up, actually. Somebody needed tight end help. I needed the upgrade or depth at wide receiver. So it kind of worked out both ways. But yeah, so from our perspective, buying Jamison Crowder in existing leagues, if the price is right, and buying him in startups, again, it was just so close, Mitch. Startup season, only a few weeks away, and I cannot wait. I'm like a little kid with Christmas approaching.
I keep telling you I'm going to stay under 25 leagues, but I'm going to be up to 50 by March, I'm sure.
Let me know what your wife says whenever you give her that information.
Exactly right.
If she's listening to this, maybe I'll edit that part out. I don't know.
There we go.
I'll get you the doghouse. Don't worry. Okay, so I want to talk about a running back, and this is a guy that you looked at my notes and you said you were laughing, and I'm going to edit this a little bit because we try to keep it at least PG-13, but I have hold on to the frickin' ball, and that's Chris Carson. He's lost, 7 fumbles this season so far, and that's only the fumbles that he's lost. He's going running back 17 right now in November mocks. And again, recency bias. I guarantee you mocks next week, especially whatever happens in Sunday's game. If Rashad Penny gets more of the workload and it's more of a 50-50 split, that might plummet again. But he was running back 29 in May. And this is one of the running backs that I planted my flag and I told everybody, go buy him. He's one of my most owned players. And again, those are the players we're focusing on. These are players that during the offseason, we went out and we got these guys because we really believed in what we were saying. So Chris Carson, not only does he have to hold on to the ball, but he's been a little bit, in my mind, and you kind of get on me when I talk about a player and say this, he's a volume dependent back. He has several carries over 10 yards, but it always seems like he's kind of a grinder. But if he gets that workload, he has incredible value. And he's running back 9, I think, up to this point in full PPR. He's been more utilized in the pass game than in years past. Looking at running backs with at least 100 carries, he ranks only behind Derrick Henry in yards after contact per attempt. So, like I said, he's a grinder, but he's still elusive, and he has the talent. My big worry, though, I've tweeted about this. We've talked about it on different forums. If he can't hang on to that ball, especially with that 7th round draft capital when he was a rookie, they could potentially move on. And that does worry me a little bit. But I think the end of the season is going to be very telling with where his value goes heading into startups. And I don't really know. How do you feel about Chris Carson? I think you like him. I don't know.
I love Chris Carson. As long as the fumbling issue doesn't become horrendous, I think he's going to be fine. And the big thing, if you go on Twitter, you're a Penny fan or you're a Carson fan, and there's no in between. But the fact is, Seattle runs the ball enough. They both can produce. There's no reason why that backfield can't produce close to what Kamara and Latavius Murray do each week. So I'm more than happy having both of them, but I love having Chris Carson right now. He's put me in playoff position in a lot of leagues.
I'm glad that you brought up the splits there and how both can be productive. And I've tried to find the middle ground, but like you said, people are either all in on Carson or all in on Rashad Penny. But I do think there's a middle ground there. And with so many opportunities to go around in that running game and the backs being more involved in the passing game, especially I think we're seeing a little bit more with Will Dissly being out and Tyler Lockett a little bit banged up recently. But there's enough to go around where both of these running backs can have value. And with how many teams we see going in the direction of a running back by committee, I don't think it really hurts Chris Carson. It hurts him a little bit, obviously. He's not going to be a top 12 running back if that's close to a 50-50 split. But at the price that we acquired him early in the offseason, running back 29, I'm okay with that. Now, whereas we talk about Kyler Murray, Josh Allen, Jamison Crowder. So we talked about those guys and we said in recent startups at their current price, we're willing to pay those prices. Running back 17 for Chris Carson. Like I said, the end of the season is going to tell us a lot. And I think I'm willing to pay the running back 17 price. The issue is wide receivers going around him. I think I would go in that direction at this point. The leagues that I have him in, I am absolutely thrilled. But this is one of the players. I love the increase in value when I have him. But Mitch, you've seen it. You have Chris Carson in several leagues, and I've asked you about him. And I've shied away from paying the price you're asking, even though I will admit it has been a reasonable price.
Well, thanks. I appreciate it. But I agree. The one thing that I worry about, if it was right now with the players that we know are on the board, I'm okay paying that running back 17 price in future startups. The problem's going to be when we have all those running backs coming in next season. I don't know if Carson's going to be able to hold that running back 17 value, even though he might be able to produce it that next season.
See, you see it as a problem. I think I would love that. I would take advantage of that. So let's say some of these rookies come in and there's a little bit more of a timeshare to wrap up the 2019 season. He could drop back down to running back 24. Maybe at that point, I have to reevaluate and I would look to buy him in startups. Now, I would be a little upset with that from the standpoint of existing leagues because obviously his value takes a little bit of a hit. but I think he's one of those guys, and we talk about time and time again, where if you have him, you're probably more on the Chris Carson truther side. So it's going to be very hard to acquire him if you don't have him, whereas it's tough to sell him to people because they probably shied away from him for a reason, whether it was the draft capital, the unknown regarding the splits and Rashad Penny, or maybe his contract situation. But he's one of those guys that's really tough. The buy and sell values don't exactly line up. But he's never had a season under 4 yards per carry. I talk about him being volume dependent. People say that about Melvin Gordon, but he's not down to those numbers that we've seen from Gordon in years past. I don't know. He's a tricky guy to look at. I was very upset not only with the 2 fumbles we saw this past week, but the way it lined up with our show. This would have been so much better to talk about last week when it seemed like his value was still rising, and now it takes a little bit of a hit. But I'm hoping that we've seen this movie before. He's had fumble problems. It hasn't cost them a game, and they're going to stick with him. But who knows? We'll see. Mitch, it's a wild ride every Sunday, especially with players like Chris Carson, because I'm so invested in them that I might get a little bit emotional at times. You could say that probably. And I could go into this Chris Carson take and changing value in so much more detail. So many stats lined up here, and you look at PFF grades, and he has the second highest elusive rating of all running backs with at least 100 carries. But again, I don't think it's an either or situation. I think Rashad Penny could be a valuable asset, but it doesn't mean that Chris Carson has to lose all value. Anyway, again, I could talk about Chris Carson forever, but it's a guy that I love throughout the entire offseason. I still like him, and I'm thoroughly enjoying the rise in value. Mitch, to wrap it up here, one more guy that you have. Who's a guy that throughout the offseason we have seen a tremendous spike in value, and you're enjoying it because you have him in several leagues?
Yeah, so as much as you love Chris Carson, I love Christian Kirk. I talked about him all off season, but back in May, he was going 109th in ADP, which is about the ninth round. And now he's going 73rd, which is middle of the 6th round. So currently he's back in wide receiver 2 in points per game, about 23rd. But he's also getting to be top 10 in average targets for a game. And a big reason is that the first few weeks of the season, Larry Fitzgerald was getting a ton of targets. But he's dropped off the map, and now Kirk is getting all those since he's came back from injuries. And the big thing that we've seen in this Arizona offense is they just throw their slot guys. They don't really throw a lot to the tight ends. They don't throw a lot to the outside guys, but they'll just continue to pepper the slot guys. In the last 6 weeks, he's actually moved all the way up to being top 10 in points per game. And I think that's going to continue for the rest of the season. And one thing that we're going to notice here going into the offseason, every single person, if you go on Twitter, you're going to see it already. Everyone's talking about DJ Moore. They're talking about Sutton. They're talking about Shark. They're talking about Ridley. And the one guy that's right next to them in every category is Christian Kirk. And no one is going to talk about him at all going into next year. And it's going to keep his ADP a little bit lower than those guys, but he has as high of a ceiling as any of those guys on that list.
This is another guy that you were really high on, and I just wasn't. Again, it was a changing situation. I had no idea what to expect. They brought in a ton of wide receivers, and it was a situation that I was avoiding. And I'm kicking myself for it because, like you said, where he was going in May, he was wide receiver 36. He was going behind Pettis. He was going behind Fuller. Now he's up there right behind Hilton, Cooks, Boyd, and right ahead of Woods, Shark, and Corey Davis. So with those 6 receivers, Mitch, where would you take him? Or who are you taking ahead of him out of those 6, if any?
The only one I would have close is Shark, but I really worry about the touchdown regression that's going to be hitting anytime now with Shark. So I'd probably take Kirk above all of those guys, including Hilton.
For me, I would take Boyd. I think that's going to be, and I'm going to learn my lesson here, based on what you do with Christian Kirk, and I hope it pays off. I'm trying to buy him in as many leagues as possible because they have to go quarterback next year. I know we talked about Ryan Finley in the past, but I think that's one where we could see a spike in value, and hopefully that offensive line improves a little bit so everything kind of picks up there in Cincinnati. But for me, I think I would go Boyd. And then I would go Kirk. And then I think the rest of the guys there, I'm not a big DJ Shark fan, and you hit on the touchdown regression. I think we're going to see it. And I'm still skeptical of what we see with the relationship between him and Nick Foles. I think he was more of a Gardner Minshew guy, and I'm very interested to see how it plays out there with the changing of the guard back to Nick Foles. But Christian Kirk, just a tremendous asset that you've seen a great spike in value. And if you took him early on in the offseason, you're reaping the benefits. Seeing these spikes in value, these players, they really are like stocks when it comes to Dynasty. We always say sell high, buy low. And I don't know in the next couple years if we're going to see Christian Kirk as low as he was early in the offseason. So wide receiver 24 in startups in a bubble. Obviously, there's some things that might happen that might change it up a little bit. Are you willing to pay that price in startups?
Yeah, he's already shown he could give us top 12 upside. So I'm more than happy to pay that price.
This is a player, I think we're going to see him as an appreciating asset, and he's going to rise in value. Whereas, T.Y. Hilton's still going ahead of him. He's going to be 30 years old. And I don't want to sound like an ageist here, but at this point, do you think from most owners that had Christian Kirk, do you think you could get him for T.Y. Hilton?
I don't think there's any way someone would accept, unless it's they want to win now and they like Hilton's schedule for the rest of the year. I don't think there's any way you could trade Hilton and get Kirk back.
That might be one reason. Yeah. I'm a big T.Y. Hilton guy, and I have him in a lot of leagues, but I don't think I could get Christian Kirk for him. And based on what's going on, I don't think you get Kirk for Brandon Cooks. I would be very skeptical to think that you could get him for Tyler Boyd and Robert Woods. Based on what's going on there, he might as well that's just a disappointing situation with what we saw from that offense in Los Angeles to what we're seeing now. So anyway, you're paying the price for Christian Kirk in startups here once the 2019 season ends, or if we get a little crazy and we join a startup here as the fantasy playoffs are underway. If you don't have Christian Kirk in an existing league, are you going out and buying him? And if so, what are you willing to pay?
I'm willing to pay upwards of a 2021st for him. I think what he's already shown is what we're hoping for what those back end wide receivers that are going to be going, between 106 and 112 in the draft next season, in the rookie draft.
I think that's more than fair. And I wouldn't even be looking to buy him if I'm only rebuilding. Like you said, you're willing to move a 2021st. He really could be a win now piece. But if I'm not competing and I have, like we said, a T.Y. Hilton, Brandon Cooks, Robert Woods, I would try to send him for Christian Kirk. I don't think I could get him. So, like we said, it's funny looking at ADP. It doesn't really line up all that well with the general population, but it is something to keep in mind. And I think Christian Kirk, he's a guy that you can buy as a contender or a rebuilding team. And there's not always pieces like that. We talk about these guys. One other guy on this list, would you take Christian Kirk over Corey Davis?
Yeah, I don't even think they're in the same ballpark.
They're not. I just had to say it because you look at the range and Christian Kirk is in there and Corey Davis is going 3 spots below him. So we had a few more players lined up, full disclosure, but we went a little over the time that we wanted to spend on this episode, trying to spit out some shorter episodes. We know everybody doesn't always have the time to sit down and listen to a show that's over an hour. Devin Singletary is another guy that I had a tremendous spike in value. May, he was right around running back 40, currently running back 28. So if you were able to get him in your rookie drafts back in May or April, if they took place then, or you had early startups, you're seeing a tremendous spike in value. And then Mitch, you kind of had a cop out here at this one, but you had Tyreek Hill on your list. And this is one where obviously there was a lot more going on that was impacting his value.
There is, but you brought up a great point earlier, is there only has to be one person in the league that's willing to pay the price on the player. And I was that person all throughout the offseason. I would buy Tyreek from anybody because of what his price was.
Do you want to share what I sold him to you for in that one league?
The 2022nd?
Yeah, and I'm very upset with myself. But anyway,
I'll be in the playoffs too.
You owe me for that one. Anyway.
I appreciate it. But right now he's going all the way up to wide receiver 4, which I think is more than fair. And while I don't blame anybody for not wanting to have Tyreek Hill on their team, but there's going to be someone in the league that's willing to pay that price. And if I'm in the league, I'm willing to pay that price for him. He's even had a game this year with 19 targets. I don't know if there's anybody else in the league that's had that many targets in a game this season.
Offhand, yeah, I don't know. But again, you got him at such a tremendous value, and it was a gamble that you took, and it paid off. And a lot of people, they didn't want to invest in him, and people panic sold, myself included. Now we're sitting here in November after he got the extension, and we're not too happy, especially if we sold low. But paying attention to those changing situations. And this one, it was really a peculiar situation because it wasn't like he got traded or people were worried about the contract. It was off the field stuff. But that is somebody that you, Mitch, you heavily invested in early on, and it's paid off up to this point. Now, we look at these players and we talk about the rising ADPs, and sure, I'm not going to lie, some of it a little bit of a victory lap because we are seeing a spike in their perceived values. But on an upcoming show, I want to stick with the same exact format, but flip it around and guys that we completely whiffed on. Because, hell, there are a ton of guys. I mean, for me, Joe Mixon. I don't want to dive into it too much tonight because I want to save it for another episode. But there are guys that we missed on. And then I kind of want to put the spin on it and see who do we think has a chance to rebound and who's going to be a nice buy low candidate and really improve moving on into the future. But we talk about these guys and we spent so much time during the off season. You want to get these guys whenever they're of value. And obviously now the guys we talked about, Tyreek Hill, Devin Singletary, Chris Carson, the whole list that we talked about, Josh Allen, Kyler Murray, you're able to sell them for a profit now. And it's like a business. You want to get in on the ground floor on these guys and see their value spike. Mitch, before we sign off here, do you have anything else for our listeners?
I would just add, this is going to be out probably right when all the trade deadlines are hitting. And just go and throw feelers out there. I've seen a whole bunch of trades go through today that I would never expect one person to accept. But it seems there's a lot of contenders willing to pay whatever. And there's a lot of rebuild people that are willing to sell old people for really, really cheap prices.
We saw a package deal that it included a few pieces, Damian Williams, Tyrell Williams, and they were moved for a 2022 and 2023. And yeah, people, if they're out of contention, they're looking to sell those pieces and look ahead to rookie drafts and vice versa. You're able to capitalize with people willing to pay a little bit of an inflated price at times for those aging assets. Because again, we've talked about this. Either make your push for a championship or start thinking about a rebuild. And that's exactly what people should be doing. But, it's really been great getting back to the Dynasty content. We've been doing the weekly start-sit shows, which has been a blast. But getting back to kind of our roots here and spending a lot of time in Dynasty. And that's really what we're going to focus on during the off season, spitting out a brand new show every week, focusing on Dynasty content and helping the listeners build championship teams. Again, I don't want to gloat, but 3 co-owned teams, 32-4 in those 3 leagues, 3-point titles in the regular season, and first-round buys. So yes, I'm very proud of that because it's content that we've been spitting out all year. It's free content. There's no paywalls. There's no Patreon. It's all free content that we are providing to the listeners and that we fully believe in ourselves. So as always, thank you for joining us for the Superflexology Fantasy Football Show. Follow us on Twitter at Superflexology. Stay ahead of those changing dynasty values and have a great night.
Thank you for listening to the Superflexology podcast. If you want the latest news in fantasy football, follow us on Twitter at Superflexology, The Bauer Club, and Dino MC.